Oh, yeah.
Yeah, me too. Okay, we are good to go.
Awesome. All right, so it's 7:02 p.m. We'll call this meeting of the Old Saybrook Board of Education to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I have a flag right behind me if anybody needs it.
Oh,
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all. I think my chair actually blocked it. All right. So up next are reports from our student representatives. So take it away, Ian and Chantal.
Okay, right. So discussed it, but after last meeting, we felt that it'd be more helpful just to have like bullet points to talk about, because like nothing's really happening, honestly. So the first one was just life updates. I've been well. Yeah, that's all I really have to say.
Yeah, I've been going on a lot of hikes. Yeah, it's really good to get away from my family for a little bit. Oh, and exercise, yeah.
That's excellent. No, that's excellent.
So, and then the next bullet point was we were going to talk about how like Old Saybrook beginning to open again and how that's affected students. For me, both of my parents are business owners, so Old Saybrook reopening is kind of it's both like positive in that like once again there will be like a source of income, but also it's a little bit nervous because I think the spread of the virus, so it is for me it's pretty conflicting.
I think since we already had a lot of students that were kind of bending the rules on the whole stay-at-home orders, I think now that's going to be reopening more publicly. I think we're going to see a lot more cases, I think, at least in the younger generation.
I just stuck my head out the door and looked over at the basketball courts at Park and Rec. It's like 25 or 30 people over there. Yeah.
And with masks or no masks?
No masks.
Oh boy.
Yeah. No, I know. I think that's going to be part of the culture, is trying to get everybody to understand, where it's important, and I'm sure that'll change too.
Yes.
So next we're going to talk about reflecting on staying involved within our school community, and more specifically like our remote involvement in extracurricular activities. So Wendy Bowden, I believe it's her senior project, has made a little Google Classroom meets every week or so for all of my AP classes and a couple of my extracurriculars, which has been nice, for NH at least to meet more than once since we've been away from school, and talk about some things we needed to talk about. So I think it's been very helpful to meet with people I haven't seen in a while.
Same here. Like, one thing that's really like just having the availability of technology, like online meetings. Like, I know for Quiz Bowl we still do practices every Wednesday, although there's no like tournament that we're working up to. It's just fun. And also another big one was Rambler. Sometime this week you guys should be expecting. Or you guys should expect a new Rambler edition, which will be our 9th this year and our 2nd since we've gone remote for school. And we're also working on one last edition. So I think it's good just to be able to at least have some sort of send-off for all the Rambler seniors to stay involved in. And then, so the next bullet point, Ian touched about it, but a lot of people have been adapting their senior projects to reflect more of like to utilize the current technology in the current situation. Ian just brought up Wendy Bowden, but I know a bunch of other people have at least attempted to have more community outreach, like remote community outreach, utilizing their senior projects. Ian, if you can.
Yeah, sure. If you guys have been to Dairy Queen recently and you've seen the little rocks on the right side, that was McKenna Gibson's senior project. So I think it's really cool to see that even though we're here, there's still senior projects that are going on and helping our community still be together. So our AP exams ended Friday last week. So there were some big changes to that, and I think it was interesting to deal with. I personally didn't have any problems submitting, but I know a bunch of people in our classes throughout that did have problems submitting, and I know College Board is working very hard to make sure that wasn't an issue, and you could email them and take the retake in June or whatever. But I think there was still a lot of problems with that.
I think one thing for me, so I personally, like Ian, I didn't really experience any problems, but I could definitely see where there were like room for error. I think especially for language exams, they were both on a separate app, and then it was all like we had to speak into a microphone. And then one of my friends in my class, they actually got a phone call in the middle of them recording, and it crashed the app and like just lost their exam. So yeah, I think overall, for most of the kids, the online exams ended up working. I don't know how well it reflected what we learned this year, but it certainly worked. But yeah, it was an interesting adaptation. So the next bullet point we wanted to discuss is, it was new ideas for graduation. I know that in the next few days there should be a more like finalized like picture of what the end of the year festivities were going on, but I know within the senior class, there's been a lot of conjecture as to like what they could look like. I think like some options, there were like a drive-through graduation. That was one of them. Another one was just like having some sort of virtual ceremony. So it's interesting. Yeah, once again, just to see how we're adapting. A lot of my friends from down south, they've already done some sort of like ceremony. So like I think it's just interesting being like having a late graduation in June. That's
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think at the end of the day, it's really just important that we're all just like closing out the year together, and I think that's all really anybody cares about. Then Jump Hill and I just want to give some overall thoughts on our senior year and how it's been affected. In addition to like our senior athletes, which are recognized last week in the video Ram Booster put out. Right. So the video that was put out was recognizing each senior athlete and all the activities that they did, including managers, which I think was very interesting. And we also showed where all of our signed students were going to be attending next year, which I think was something cool because I didn't know that we had so many athletes that were going to be playing next year. Yeah. So
one thing that a lot of seniors that I've heard of, like I've talked to, is like they've kind of accepted that like their senior year is different, but one thing a lot of people are concerned about is that the first semester of freshman year of college might be affected. I'm like personally I'm very scared that that's going to happen. I really hope that we have an in-person first semester. But yeah, so a lot of my concern about the pandemic really shifted to how it might affect college after the summer. But other than that, yeah, I really hope.
I think I'm personally lucky that I don't have to worry about that. By going to the Naval Academy, we have a summer that we have to spend called Plebe Summer. And it's kind of like a boot camp, and they're having us quarantine for 2 weeks while we're there. So we don't have to worry about that. And the whole campus is closed off to visitors. So I'll be there.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So does anyone have any questions or just want us to elaborate on anything that we talked about?
This is Eileen Baker. I'm curious to know how you have found your online classes. How is that working?
It's been interesting. I think that it's very different for each class based on like workload and when work comes out. But I think we're so many weeks into this now. We know when certain teachers are going to post the schedule for the week or if they are or not. And, just blocking out certain amounts of time to what we're going to do each class. It's definitely not the same as if we were in school because I'm only doing like 1 or 2 classes per day. Right. It's different classes.
And just to add on to something, since Ian and I are both like seniors, we already ended up taking a lot of like AP classes that already had big online components using Google Classroom and other online textbooks and assignments. So for me, like I know as like a person, like none of my classes were changed that drastically because we already had such robust online coursework. But I'm sure for people in like different types of classes, it is a more difficult transition. But I think overall, it was pretty positive for me.
And have you been able to connect with your teachers live or just completing the assignment?
Yeah.
Before our AP exam in calculus, Ms. Dimberger had like every single day the previous week, and at least once a week previous before that. We've gotten to meet with her, and it's been very good besides that for other classes.
Yeah, so like just like the online using Zoom or using Google Meet, it's been very helpful to stay connected with not only the teachers but with also like our other classmates and everyone else.
That's great. Other questions for our student representative? All right. So we'll.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
This is George. I just want to offer my congratulations again to Ian for his acceptance into the Naval Academy. And
Thank you.
And also wish John Paul best of luck in the fall. I understand that the anxiety is pretty tough, but good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, take care.
So it is you, Chantal. Nicholas and I are both hoping that he gets to start on campus in the fall. So fingers crossed all the way around. But
did you get accepted to a college?
Oh yes. So in the fall, I'll be attending Princeton University.
wow.
For you.
Wow.
Congratulations.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And so we'll go over later in the meeting your survey results and talk a little bit more about that. But thank you guys so much for your reports and really for bringing your own flavor to the student representative position this year. You know, it's great.
Awesome.
That's one of the best parts about having different representatives every year is that you get a different perspective and different thoughts about the position itself. So thank you guys so much for participating.
Of course.
Really appreciate it.
Tara, will they be on again before our last meeting?
Oh yeah.
Well, we're gonna later in the meeting, Eileen will go over their survey, and then we actually have one last meeting before our year ends.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's certainly we'll get a chance hopefully to send you off. But it is good to see everybody online tonight. I do have to say it like this from a comment perspective. It's nice to see everybody's faces.
And Tara, is there opportunity to maybe get a listing of what the different senior projects were because we couldn't get a chance to come in and listen?
That's a great idea, Eileen. That's a great idea. Jan, if that's something that we could add,
Yes.
that would be awesome. And just kind of how they've adapted
Yes.
in this new world, that would be great.
Yes. Let me see what we can do.
That's awesome.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to move on to the consent, which is tonight the regular meeting minutes from May 12th and the special meeting minutes from May 13th. I'd like a motion to approve those minutes, please.
I'll make the motion. It's Jan.
Moved by Jan and a second.
Being second.
Second by Eileen. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. So next up on the agenda is strategic plan interviews.
Yes. So now I will take off the mask. That's just too hard.
It looks good though, Sam.
It's a new fashion statement. So we went ahead as we told the board we would and wrote a request for proposals for strategic plan quotes. And we did receive 5 quotations from different companies, none of which we've worked with here in Saybrook before. They represent, because they obviously have to match the quote, the RFQ, they represent the scope and sequence that we're looking for. But in fact, the prices vary wildly. Our most expensive quote was about $70,000. And our least expensive was about a little over $20,000.
Big gap.
Big gap, yeah. And I think that strategic planning, the way we do it here in Saybrook, is a little bit more streamlined. And so, I think some people wrote about 30-day involvement, 30 full work days on their part. And so, in the past, last time we did this,
There's some background noise going on.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of feedback. I don't know if anybody else is. A lot of echo.
Yeah, I think it's coming off of,
Okay.
actually, it looks like you're lying, Karen. Do you mind muting when Jan's speaking?
Sure.
Thanks. And that's just good advice for everybody.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Is that good
Better.
now?
Better.
Okay.
Better.
So, last time we did this, we did reach out to some of the folks who put in quotes, and we, talked about a la carte versions, and some of the pricing is even a la carte. But Amity Goss and I reviewed we were sent, and there are two organizations that we definitely would like to bring before the board, and I'm finishing up reviewing the third one. So of the 5 submitted, for sure we'd like to bring 2 forward to you to interview, and potentially a third. And we're wondering when the Board of Education would like to do that. Prior to this meeting, I spoke with Trent about what's on our agenda for the next meeting. And it's not that significant. It's we have potentially one non-certified contract discussion. We have, so that would be executive session. We have the school lunch price, the tuition, and what am I forgetting, Trent? And my vacation rollover. So those are all fairly quick. And I think that we probably could do 30-minute interviews of 2 or perhaps 3 groups if the board wants to. Otherwise, we should be looking for another night or an afternoon, or you could even handle it as a subcommittee of the board, though I think you said at a prior meeting that you all wanted to be involved in it to choose the next strategic plan facilitator. So
The board think about expanding our next meeting a little bit to include those interviews.
How long is each interview with the group? Because we don't want to rush them either.
Right.
I think we can probably do it in 30 minutes. You can have the packet ahead of time. The questions can be created ahead of time, and they can all be sent forward to you. So we probably could conduct these in about 30 minutes each.
Or we could do it, if we feel like that's kind of putting too much in one evening, we could split it up and have our regular board meeting, which will be on June 9th. And then we could just set a date for a special meeting. And I guess, too, Jan, it'll make a difference on whether the people who we'd be interviewing would be available and what their availability would be. So, is there kind of a feeling either way amongst the board?
I'd like to have a separate meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I concur, because minimally it'd be 2 hours in
Yeah.
addition to our meeting.
I'm kind of leaning the same way, Alan and Eileen. Other thoughts? Some thumbs up and some head nods out there. So
I agree.
Yeah.
It'll take longer, and then we'll have follow-up discussion, so.
yeah, and I mean maybe we could start, Jan, like at 6 o'clock instead of at 7 kind of thing, so that we're not going terribly late.
Sure.
And which date were you looking at? We have to come up with one.
It sounds like we might have to look for a date, Eileen,
Yeah.
and probably reach out to the different entities to see what their availability is.
So
Yeah.
if I
And how much was our last strategic plan? How much did that cost the board?
It was in the 20,000 range, a little bit over.
Okay.
Jan, were you surprised that the previous vendor did not apply?
I was surprised. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mrs. Pendleton sent it out to them, emailed it out to them specifically, and we didn't hear back from them.
Huh. Is Betty Osgood still there?
I believe so.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's too bad because she was very effective.
So how about if I tried to see if they were available for the 11th, would that work?
Go get my book.
You mean 11?
6 o'clock start?
Jen,
Yes.
how many, I missed, how many people are you trying to bring in?
Maximum of 3, but maybe only 2. I have, there's one that I need to review again.
are there any names you can share?
Yeah, so there was Anlar, which is a big national company, PCG, again, a national company, Insight Ed Group, which seems to be a New England company, and it does have a Connecticut connection. The Connecticut Center for School Change, that's the group I know the best. They've provided professional development for our teachers, and for me, actually, I've had some professional development with them. And a group called Strategic, I forgot to write the rest of the name down. Strategic Matters, I think it is. Another company I didn't know. They were kind of a New England Eastern Seaboard kind of company. So they all have a national connection.
The Center for School Change would be interesting to see, to investigate. I'm sure you're going to pick the right one. They seem to be very helpful with education.
Right.
Well, that date, at least for me, sounds good, Jan. I don't know about the rest of the board, if the 11th would work. I see some head nods going out there.
It works for me. It's Jan.
Okay.
Herman.
So
What time?
I'll try
6?
I'll try to start at 6. That way that gives us enough time to debrief and even have a little in-between discussion after the first person comes in and first group comes in, the second group comes in. If we have 3, that it still won't go terribly late. So we'll try for the 11th starting at 6.
And let's all order pizza so we're eating the same meal together.
Virtual pizza. Make some brownies. Jan, quick question, if I may.
Yeah.
So there's a huge gap between 20 grand and 70 grand. 70 is certainly out of the ballpark, but I'm just wondering about the scope of services that these companies are offering. Are they all very similar? What was it that the 70 grand company was offering that everybody else wasn't?
All of these folks seem to offer things a la carte, and that was true last time as well. So I just gave you bottom line total numbers. But last time when we worked with that other company, we went to them and said, "That's what you're quoting is a little steep. Could we take this and this off of it?" We disaggregated some of our own information, and they were comfortable with that, and that dropped the price down. So while obviously price matters, and we'll try to bring groups forward to you that are fiscally responsible choices, we also are looking at the quality of the packet they're presenting, so that we can always say to them, really like you, but here's some concerns, and what can we do to amend that?
And then would you have the opportunity to check a few references?
Yes.
Other schools that they worked with?
Yep, that's what will happen between here and there.
Okay.
Jan, question, this is Alan.
Yes, Alan.
Just in terms of, these sound like bigger organizations, they'll have several facilitators that they could offer up. So I'm assuming in the end, we'll have the ability, as Karen has asked, to have references on certain facilitators and be able to choose from, in some cases, maybe several. Is that right?
That's right for some of them, yes. Some of them assign you a team, it looks like. Others say there are different folks that they recommend, but there are bios. In the documents that you'll get, there are bios for the folks that are involved.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Other questions for Jan about the interview process? Okay. Anything else for us on this, Jan?
No, that's it for now.
Okay, good. It sounds like a good path forward. I'm looking forward to hearing these groups present.
Great. Yep, we'll get it set up.
Awesome. All right, so next up on the agenda is our student representative survey. And I think I'll be handing this over to Eileen.
Hello, Ian and John Paul, and just wanted to tell you how much your honesty in filling out the surveys, because that really does help us to think about ways of improving this particular role. All board members have had a chance to read. Have you read the evaluations? So it might be an opportunity to ask some questions. I have some thoughts, but I wanted to actually let the other board members speak first if they'd like to.
So I actually had 2 questions, and I'm just more curious if you guys know or not. Has the process, obviously the process isn't going to be the same this year, choosing next year's representatives, but has that process started? Has there been like any kind of online or no that hasn't, Eileen? And I see head shaking now.
That's my question too.
I was going to ask that.
I was going to ask
Okay.
Jan, you might be without one. Maybe we'll have to, I don't know, Jan maybe have some input, I don't know.
I mean, there's still time. It's like, it's not, I've like a lot of my friends from other schools for like class office elections, things like that, they're just doing some sort of online form. So like, I figured that wouldn't be like the most difficult. So like, that could happen over a few weeks period.
The other thing is part of the criteria for the student rep is to come to a Board of Education meeting. That's
Right.
part of the policy and the regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what both of you may have commented was to be able to come and sit and see how the board operates.
So I know back in March, Mr. Anastasio and I, that was before the world changed, Mr. Anastasio and I had a conversation about it, and he was getting ready to launch that. So I will check back in with him.
That'd be great. Thanks. And so that kind of ties in this way. So obviously it'll be a little different this year, giving the new reps an opportunity to talk to you guys. You know, so we'll have to see how that ends up working out because, you know, it might be more Google Meets. Those are my only questions.
Well, I wanted to jump in unless any other board members want an opportunity.
This is Alan. So for John Powell, I have a question. I think it was number 4. You responded about some congruency between the transition from you and Ian leaving and new representatives coming on board. What would you suggest?
I think honestly, like something that might be helpful that like Ian and I never formally had was just like maybe just like an hour sit down where we really like talk like directly to the new representative, and that doesn't have to be anything official. That could just be anything as casual as like setting up a FaceTime call at like any like day. So I just felt like obviously because they will be unable to like, or unless they're able to like come and watch a meeting, I think Ian and I can really just give them like a rundown about like what they should expect at every meeting, just so like they could hear it from students to perhaps make it a little bit more approachable.
Question, and we should try to see if we can accomplish that. Good idea.
I think that's great feedback. I did not look at last year's feedback from the student reps, but I kind of feel like that we've received before, and I wonder if you know, John, I appreciate you saying it doesn't need to be anything formal, but maybe it is something that can be facilitated if there is a turnover from because I know students get busy and that's hard to kind of coordinate, especially this time of year. But if I don't know, Eileen, if you or somebody else can help coordinate that turnover, because I seem to recall that feedback came last year as well.
Maybe I'll work with Jan.
Yeah.
Be able to get that to happen because that's essential.
Yeah, Karina, you're right. It was mentioned last year as well. And I don't remember why it didn't happen, but we'll make sure that it does.
Because I think that can really support, because both of you said that it took a little while to warm up and, you know, and really kind of feel as though your contributions are fully appreciated. And maybe that can help accelerate that warm up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Anyone else have any thoughts? Well, I wanted to jump in. I wanted to say that education has had student reps now since 1995. That's pretty impressive. And we were one of the first high schools to actually have student reps, and we designed policy very carefully. And I think that both of you were wonderful representatives. And I think what's common about most of the student reps is getting a sense of, can we say what we feel? Are we respected? What if our voices are different from the board? Each year is a different year. You have a very cohesive Board of Education that respects student voice and wants to know exactly what is happening on the ground level, and that's really important. I think it was maybe Ian's remarks that said, you know, that he didn't feel that he needed to review what he was going to be speaking about. He felt pretty comfortable, and that he realized how valuable his input was for board members. But I think that he must have met with Jan and Sheila. And I think that's an introduction also. Jan, is that what normally happens then? The high school principal and yourself meet with the new student reps?
I've actually been doing this with the board chair pretty consistently.
Yeah, with Miss Barrows.
Yeah, I had a great time. It's one of my favorite things.
Okay.
I loved meeting you guys, and it was fun. So, I look forward to doing it again.
It's just an important introduction, significantly valuable to have you on the board, and more importantly, that you represent a cross-section of students, and something that's very different. I know, Ian, you came to the CAVE workshop that I facilitated on student representatives, and I think in Old Saybrook, what we value is a cross-section of opinions and ideas, and there is no gatekeeper. So there is no grade point average. Teachers are not part of the selection process. It's all student generated, and that's valuable so that everybody can be heard. And I think your contributions were excellent. The other question I have is, how did you feel in previous years? We've gotten responses in terms of how you would relate to other students to bring things to the Board of Education. How do students know that you're the representatives, and if you want to mention something to you, how does that happen? That's been a challenge.
Right. So I could, oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay, right. So I think one thing that, like, going into this year, I know that, like, Ian and I both are involved in, like, a bunch of different activities. So, like, from the music department to the theater department to sports to other clubs. So I knew that, like, going into it, that we have, like, a basic outlet to communicate to a certain population of the student body. But also, one thing that happened in the school, I know last year there was an announcement made, Ian and Jumpel will be the new student representatives. And some point in this year, there was like a present, like, during the addresses to each graduating, or to each class, they once again reiterated, like, Ian and Jumpel are the two student representatives. So I think, like, from the school's perspective, I think they did a great job just communicating to the student body that we are people that.
So I think that, in addition to the Superintendent Principals Advisory Committee, where we also are, we also participate in and get a lot of, we're also always a meeting agenda. We always get feedback from all the students that are there. So I think it's another way to pull more information from students.
And that's terrific, because that's an important aspect of it.
Quick question.
You have to unmute yourself, Karen.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
Do you have an opportunity to sort of introduce yourself to the underclassmen who most likely wouldn't know who you are? Is there, at an assembly, or how do the younger kids get to know who their reps are?
Well, and Mr. A, every year, I don't know when it is during the year, but they always do, like, an address to the grades. So there's no, like, moment where Ian and I stand before the underclassmen are introduced. But, like, one thing they do is they put both of our, like, photos on the screen, like, on the projector in the auditorium, for everybody. So yeah, I think that.
Okay.
If you didn't know it before, then you'll see our face. Right?
No, but that's important. Thanks, Karen, for that.
We'll get special lanyards next year or something, or sashes.
Ooh.
Sashes, right?
The sash. I like the sash.
Yeah, I'll take a note on that one. I would love to see the sash. Anything else that you want to cover, Eileen, and our student rep? Anything else that you want to cover?
No, I think we're good. I just wanted to congratulate you both, and thank you for being so open and confident to share what you know students are thinking, because that's how Board of Education members help to make decisions. And essential. Your involvement was and is essential.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both so much. It really is important, I think, to hear, students' take on what's going on, because it's your school. That's where you spend a huge amount of your time, and so I think it's extremely valuable. So thank you both so much.
May I just say a word? Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Jan.
Thanks. So first of all, I want to thank both of you for being so dedicated to this. And I had the opportunity to see you interact with your peers in Superintendent Principals Advisory. And there are people in that group from all 4 grades. And I really do think that students appreciated that you came, with an open book. You had no agenda. You listened to whatever they had to say, and you took notes and brought it back to the board. And greatly appreciate your approach to it. Every year we have 2 new people, and they do their work a little bit differently. And that was your style this year, and I think it worked very well. And I think it was relaxed for you because that is your style. So greatly appreciated all of the work that you did and the opportunities you gave to your peers to be heard. That's
Absolutely.
it. Thank you. And we will miss you. We will definitely miss you. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to see what you 2 do with your lives, because you're going to be amazing.
Yeah, ask around. I'm really good at embarrassing you in public places, being like, "Oh my gosh, they went to our school. They one of our reps. We own a piece of you." Thank you guys again.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Eileen.
Very welcome.
All right, well, let's move on to Amity and Jan talking about our professional development wrap-up.
I'm going to turn this right over to Amity, but just as the context setting, we do this every year at this time, either in May or June. We talk to you about professional learning this year and how we targeted it to match our goals in the strategic plan, and those things that we recognized on the fly needed to be shored up, distance learning. And now I'm going to turn it over to Amity Goss, who is going to present to you her annual professional learning wrap-up. Amity?
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Trent, I'm wondering if, do you want me to share my screen so that I can show the presentation?
Yeah, that would be great. Obviously nobody's here with the projector, so I think just in case people can't pull it up from their OneNote, I think that might be helpful.
All right, I'm going to give it a try.
All right. Fingers crossed. Don't crash the system, please. I can see it.
Hey, all right.
This new WebEx upgrade is working pretty well so far. I like it.
Yes, it is.
All right, so as you know, we use the same template every time, and this just explains to you what our goals are for this evening, to share the overview of professional learning for this past year, and to examine those opportunities through the lens of the strategic plan, as well as to look at our future professional learning goals this year specifically with an eye to the impact of COVID-19, because this has really changed our professional learning landscape. The connections to the strategic plan are numerous. Of course, goal 1, which is about curriculum. A lot of the professional learning that we do is around writing curriculum and understanding how to utilize programs as part of our curriculum. Number 2 is instructional design, and that again is a huge part of professional development, making sure that we are sharing with students the best that we possibly can. And then goal number 3, which is about students, a lot of our PR needs, but also students who are learning to speak English as a second language, and the increasing social and emotional needs of students. And you'll actually see in this presentation that last one, the increasing social and emotional needs of students, becomes even more important as we look to reopening schools. So this slide you see every year, and interestingly, I barely had to change it. It was very interesting. It was 118 educators this year. It was 118 educators last year. Access professional learning. The handful was actually a different handful, which means that over time we've probably managed to reach every one of our educators in some way. And they were from all of our schools and academic departments. And again, the cost was very similar to last year. This year, we spent about $26,000 on offsite workshops. And the average number of those workshops, again, was 2. That seems to happen every year. This year, we were able to focus. Those offsite workshops were really part of an embedded ongoing plan for teachers. So we really didn't just send somebody out to a random workshop that they requested. Our instructional leaders did an amazing job saying, all right, so this is something that you want. How does that fit with sort of your ongoing plan, and what that will look like when you come back and implement, and share with colleagues too. That was another thing we did well this year.
Amity?
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's Karina. On that previous slide, are those dates accurate?
Oh,
The
no,
slide is cut off, actually.
I apologize. I fixed it on one version and apparently not this one. So I do apologize for that.
Okay, thank you.
And this slide shows you the way that this has changed over time. So this slide does have the correct date on it. And so the change from 1819 to 1920, you see there in that column. But initially, additionally, this year, we had 27 workshops related to special education, which aren't listed here. And we were able to, through grant funding, to provide 50 teachers with training to support bilingual learners. We will continue doing that. That is a group that we bring in. We'll continue to use our grant funding for that. Hopefully next year, maybe not, depending on what our needs are because of the pandemic. But we like making sure that everybody has that sort of same baseline understanding of how to support our students who are learning English. And we were really making good strides in making sure that everybody had that training. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to use our grant funding for that. And if we can't, we will go back to it in future years. We were able actually to support a lot more days worth of workshops through people sharing the information that they had learned. And so that was a strength for this year. Our professional learning landscape is not going to look the same for a long time. So this year we missed out on a few things. We were very excited to potentially attend professional learning for our new 6-8 math program. That wasn't offered because of the pandemic. And so that will slow us down a little bit getting started in the fall. We had really looked to continue that English Learner PD. That may not be able to happen. We will have to switch a lot of our PD to focus on social and emotional learning and trauma-informed practices, because a lot of our students will have been through a lot of things, and teachers too, to be honest, making sure, and we will need to make sure that everyone is supported appropriately when they return to school. We actually are already looking at things like health and safety protocols. We were looking today for how to wear a mask PD and how to clean your classroom PD. And so all of that will have to happen in the fall or over the summer. And in addition, we have done a lot of work in the past 5 years about personalizing instruction. And it breaks my heart a little bit every time I hear, well, everybody will be 6 feet apart and all the desks will be facing forward. I feel as though people think that we lecture still. And that is the exception rather than the norm. And so this idea that we can open our schools and everything will be just fine, we'll just stay 6 feet apart. And of course, everyone will be focused on the teacher at the front of the room. We've worked really, really hard to get away from that model. And so I'm very concerned about making sure that we don't lose personalization because of the restrictions of social distancing and the personal protective equipment requirements.
Emily, this is Karen. I have a quick question. Could you just elaborate or give a few examples on the second bullet about social emotional learning and trauma-informed practices, what that might look like? Well, the trauma-informed practices, yeah.
That's something that we started with our restorative practices training. So there are some trauma-informed practices embedded there. Really being that place where kids know that they have a trusted adult is sort of the foundation of that. But to be honest with you, that's a committee that Kathy Bai is heading up, and they are talking about what the best ways to do that will be. So I am not as informed as I should be about exactly what that looks like, because that's happens to be committees I'm not on.
I can add to that a little bit. So we are I know that they are exploring some assessments. So we'll want to work with our students and our staff in the fall to determine where we are emotionally, and look at some trauma, anxiety, depression type assessments. And I know that her committee is doing that now. I think that we will have, like everything else about this pandemic, it's all about how much you can flex and how quickly you can flex. And so depending upon what we learn from that, they will be building an arsenal of different trainings and different opportunities. We know for sure that with teachers, it's going to be about, instructing in a trauma informed way. So there are a number of programs, canned programs that we have worked with in the past that we could reuse and develop. And then both Kathy and a number of folks from her staff and I are involved in committees on state levels that are actually talking about adopting some of these instruments to assess what's going on. So there could even be a state adoption on some of these things.
Question, who has been, you're saying, Amity, you were using some grant monies, but who is providing the bilingual training?
That's out of Southern Connecticut State University. They have a federally funded program that actually teaches teachers what it feels like to be an English learner, or in this case, a German learner. That they use German with us so that we would understand what it felt like to be learning the language that the class is occurring in.
Mm-hmm.
And then they give us strategies for how to support students who don't understand the primary language in the classroom yet.
And is there opportunity in that training to incorporate, not necessarily to incorporate, but to involve families, because families are significant to this process, especially for those students that are bilingual?
Yes, the initial part of that training is really focused on making sure the classroom is accessible, but there are follow-up modules that talk about family engagement and community engagement. We're looking at making sure that we can get the first module together first, and then we'll branch off after that. But yes, that is part of their overall training.
Thanks.
There have been some really exciting successes this year in professional learning, and a large part of that is owed to the instructional leadership team. They've worked very hard to make sure that they're offering professional development constantly for their departments, and that they're connecting all of the opportunities in-house and offsite together so that they actually matter. Because we know that professional learning, when you just go out and you see an expert, it might be very inspiring, but the odds of that changing your instruction in your classroom are very slim. Whereas if you've gone and you've seen someone and you've gotten inspired, and then you come back and you talk to your coach about it, and your coach helps you implement the practices that you've seen actually in your classroom, that there is a much greater chance of that having a positive impact for students. So the ILT actually understands that very well, and they work to support that goal. So I think we're getting a lot more out of our investment in professional learning than we used to. And in addition to that, we have focused on different departments. So you probably noticed last year we had a large involvement in health and professional and physical education, teachers having a lot of PD. And then this year it was sort of not their turn again. So they had a little bit, but not the same amount that they had last year. And this year we really focused on supporting our math teachers, because it was something they felt like they were enough into their adoption of their programs that they were ready for more. So we've been able to also personalize and individualize the professional learning options. We've worked really hard to make sure that we're not doing one size fits all PD. And that goes back to asking really principals to support teachers in their own schools, but then the principals have done amazing work in breaking those groups up even smaller as well. So we've worked hard to make sure that we are doing the same thing for teachers that we ask teachers to do for students. And our next steps, our goals for next year will really be looking at social emotional supports and trauma-informed practices. We need to also increase technology supports and digital safety awareness, helping teachers to understand how to utilize the tools that they've newly adopted optimally, and how to keep kids safe online, and teachers as well from fraud. Also to increase capacity for personalized and individualized learning, particularly given all of the constraints that will be happening when we do reopen schools. And as always, we need to continue to grow capacity to support our English learners because that is a growing population for us.
And Amity, for the English language learners, are they coming in mostly at Goodwin or they're coming just in all the schools?
Coming in all the schools, but Goodwin always has the most kids coming in as just enrolled as preschoolers and kindergartners and moving on up through our system. But we have had an influx this year, particularly at the high school, of students who are coming for the first time to school in America. And they are mostly speaking Spanish, not exclusively, but mostly speaking Spanish. And to jump into 9th, 10th, 11th grade, learning English is a very challenging thing, and our teachers have done an amazing job working to support them. Thanks.
Amity, thank you for that presentation, and you always do such a great job communicating what you're doing. And I know that the development of the PD is a lot of thought goes clearly. I think you did say that focus on technology will be included next year. Will it also include, because I think our teachers did a really, really great job mobilizing on short notice to a remote learning environment. Will it also include not only the use of technology and the safety aspect associated with it, but how to really maximize learning through a virtual, even though, our hope is, of course, that we can return to a physical school. But just as you talked about how we don't teach, from the front of the room, it's a really personalized experience in the classroom. I know that we want to ensure that we get as close to that as possible virtually. Is there an opportunity to include some of that in professional development?
Yes, actually, that was one of the things we talked about in DLT just today. We have plans. The instructional leadership team has a ton of plans for things that we would like to do for the fall, because we want to include a lot of the lessons that we've learned about how to do remote instruction well, because we know that even if we are in person in classrooms, there will definitely be some sort of a hybrid model. And we may end up in the situation again at some point in the future. And so we really want to make sure that we have structures and supports in place, and maybe even as specific as talking to students about what worked well for them, and then asking those teachers how they did what worked for students, and then using those practices to sort of be a very clear guideline, if not a mandate, for things that need to be done. I think there's a lot we could do to streamline it now that we've learned a little bit, and that we wouldn't have to do it over the weekend. we might be able to make some really good choices to make remote instruction robust for the fall.
I think I would add to that when teachers left here, we quickly put together an agreement about what teaching and learning would look like literally in 24 hours. So we did not know some of those concerns that might crop up, or we did not all have the same vision of what it would look like. And over time, I think the disparate feelings and visions about it have come more to middle and more similar. But one of the things that the state is talking about, that district leadership team is talking about, is the need for synchronous learning, that at least some time needs to be set aside for students to be engaged in the classroom with their teacher in real time. And that has been a finding of educators throughout the state, and I would imagine throughout the nation, that needs to be done. That's the closest thing one can do to replicate what happens in the brick and mortar classroom.
And one of our challenges with synchronous learning is that we just haven't had the technology. So we did not, our teachers' computers did not have microphones, did not have cameras. And so it was not something that we could do to say to them, you must do this, because that wasn't an option for us. We also struggled to make sure that kids had devices. And we knew that lots and lots of kids were sharing devices at home with family members. And so to say there'll be a meeting at 10 for this third grade class, and what if there's a meeting at 10 for that, for the child's sibling? it just wasn't necessarily possible given the technology that we had available to us literally overnight, when we started this.
Hi, Amity, it's Cindy. How are you?
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. I just a thought for you, just on the social emotional realm of it. It's always been my thinking that if we do that kind of work at the beginning of the school year, that that togetherness and the ability to have a environment where the kids feel safe, comfortable, that's so much more important even now. However it's going to be rolled out. I think what we have to think about sometimes is that the teachers are so wanting to be on top of everything with the curriculum and all those demands. And I don't think we have to prioritize the social emotional part of it and give them sort of permission to have those few weeks of no demands from the curriculum so that you can build that basis for the social emotional. All that good work will come. It will automatically come after that if the environment is created that way in the beginning. But it's I find that, teachers are always worried. I have to get this in. I have to get this curriculum thing in. So it's just a thought of mine that if they knew that there was an ease up on that part and a priority with the social emotional, especially after this many months out of school, I think that would.
Cindy, were you in our DLT meeting today? Because that's exactly what we talked about.
Really? Okay. No, yeah. I'm sorry. I missed it.
Yeah. No, we talked about it today. We talked about how important it is for us to send the message that there is a period of time at the beginning where we have to put our teams of adults back together. We have to put our teams of students back together. And it's going to take time, and it's going to be time well spent.
Absolutely.
And our teachers were super clear that they want to focus on that part because they know that they can build academics later. And if we do end up remote at some point, they know that they need to have relationships with kids before that happens. So their number one priority is building those relationships because nobody can imagine doing education this way without having had that opportunity.
Okay.
And everybody will have a new teacher next year. So that's really important work. As we move forward to the next grade, it's going to be very important that students have an opportunity to get to know the teacher no matter how we're teaching.
The other piece I think that's come up on the state level, it's Eileen Baker, is actually the reality of kids wearing masks and how that's actually going to work. So there's a lot of interest, and at the same time, really taking a look at what's realistic.
8 o'clock.
And taking consideration of health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And teachers as well, who can hear very well with somebody wearing a mask.
I know, right? So other questions for Jan and Amity about this?
This is George.
Go ahead, George.
So Amity, again, fantastic presentation. Thank you. Just a quick question about the challenges. So you mentioned that there was some incomplete training, including the 6th to 8th grade math, which I presume is the open up math curriculum that you guys have adopted for this year. So was the previous professional training for open up, was it in person? Is that the reason why it stopped?
Yes, it was scheduled to be over, I want to say 4 days, but it may have been 2. I think it was 4 days though, that was supposed to happen at one of the RESCs. So one of the educational service centers in Connecticut. We were going to go there and take part in a training. There are online options through the company, but they are not cost effective. So we're looking at the option of either doing an online training with the person who would have offered it at that educational service center, or having our math coach trained and having her come back and deliver the training, and just trying to figure out what is the best combination of efficacy and cost effectiveness. But she sent me a list of, I think Stacy, the math coach, sent me a list of like 6 different options. So she's on it.
That's good. I mean, those are good options. I mean, I like that. Especially since we're going to a new curriculum, I think getting some heads up training, I think, would be very important. So thank you. That's great.
Yes, and she would like to be trained alongside of them, but if she ends up having to deliver the training to them, then that's fine too. She's willing to do whatever works.
Other questions for Amity and Jan? It sounds like it's going to be a challenge, Amity. I look forward to hearing about what we come up with for next year. I just took a bunch of notes too, because I was thinking about, our own corporate platform has changed about the way we do training. And they came up with a really clever platform. So I was just making notes for myself to look it up for you.
Ooh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, they did a good job on making it interactive, because normally it's the time for me to eat lunch. Excellent. Well, thank you both. That was really informative.
Thank you.
All right, so next up is the budget update with Jan and Julie.
Yes. So we continued to put numbers together. Mrs. Pendleton and Mrs. Lestority continued to look at the end of year purchase orders, which are still coming in, though they're dwindling, and look at the impact of being closed down has had on our end of year budget. And tonight, while the numbers are not final, Mrs. Pendleton and Mrs. Lestority have gotten them much closer, and we have real numbers to share with you this evening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Pendleton to walk you through what ended up happening. When we presented to the Board of Finance coming up on a month ago, we still did not know if we were going to be coming back to school at that time. The final decision hadn't been made. We were still in the process of negotiating our transportation contract. We didn't know what we were going to be facing for health and medical issues potentially among staff, because the predictions for the pandemic were still very dire, and we weren't sure what we were going to be expending there. So now we have better numbers. We have more of the year behind us. We have a few weeks of the academic year left, and Mrs. Pendleton is ready to present those to you this evening. So, Julie?
Thank you, Jan. So as you can see from the report, a very large chunk of unexpended funds come from salaries and benefits. And they're pretty obvious. We ended up not really needing another substitute for the rest of the year. So, that's money that we can almost assure we're going to spend. So there's an easy $100,000 right there. We also had a lot of things that didn't run. Spring sports. We didn't bring in extra custodial staff because our custodial staff has been working, full time, and we've been able to keep them working full time. So we haven't brought in, summer or springtime cleanups and that kind of thing. And all those stipends and student workers and, overtime and extras that we might have paid in a normal spring added up to a fairly good sized number, over a couple $100,000. We also had projected all year long, we knew we were going to have a surplus in the para account because we knew we didn't fund every single one of those positions, partly because of changes in student needs and partly due to enrollment and things of that nature. So on top of that, we then were able to equalize their pay through June 30th. And so it was a constant number. Again, in the spring, sometimes what we see with sports and different events, we have increased para hours that are part of all of that. So we didn't use those funds this year. And then, we did have some certified staff turnover as well. So that's really the culmination of, I think, close to $600,000 right there, along with the benefit changes in different enrollment statuses for benefits throughout the year. The other areas that we anticipate a fairly large number is in transportation, and we'll talk more about that later on tonight, but we're estimating, no spring sports once again, no field trips. All of that has a significant impact on the spring number of what we spend on transportation typically. So that's another area of significant surplus. Supplies, although we continue to purchase supplies, classroom supplies weren't needed in the same way that they would be needed had we been in school. So those are the really large that contribute to a very significant surplus that we'll have this year. And then on the converse side of that, we ended up doing some projects. As you know, we've been given that list at the last board meeting, and the technology needs, of course. Amity did a great job in going right before me and expressing how, that's become a critical item for us as we move into the fall. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Things like gasoline for buses and, utilities and water, and all of those are way down from what they would normally be. So all of those bits and pieces have added up to a surplus anticipated of anywhere from 1.2 to 1.5 million by the end of the year.
I just want to point out that a few of those items are unrelated to COVID. And so, Julie, maybe you can walk us through like the tuitions and how that just was fewer tuition dollars needed.
Right. There were a few of those, Jen. That's a good point. That ended up being placements that didn't occur. We didn't have the number that we anticipated when this budget was built that would be going to some of the other high schools, the VOTEC schools and so forth. Those placements didn't happen. So there's a significant number between those two scenarios, both non-COVID related. I think, the majority of things where we did save money was, mostly due to school being, shut down since March. But those are a couple that absolutely didn't fall in that category.
I have a quick question, Julie.
Sure.
With the food services, I know that we've been producing a lot of meals. How did the food services budget out? Is it about the same? We would have been doing those meals had the kids been in school anyway. So how's that working out?
So it's a good question. So as you know, food service is not part of the regular operating budget at all. But what's very interesting, Tara, is the way this program was set up, this emergency feed for COVID, allowed for reimbursement far greater than we normally would get on a normal situation. We get a small amount for a full paying student, like 26 cents a meal. We get considerably more for a student who receives reduced meals. And then, of course, we get the most reimbursement from the federal government for those that are free. But that's a fairly small number for us in total. So we rely on the revenue that comes in from full paying students. In this case, we got reimbursed more than we do for any other meal that we serve, both for the breakfast and the lunch. So I have those numbers being pulled together. I should have them for you in June, but it's actually going to really help the food service program for the coming year. It's definitely offset the fact that we couldn't do catering. So one kind of balanced out the other. I mean, we're not getting rich off of it, but it's going to definitely sustain it.
That's great. I mean, because obviously it's such an important program, and I'm actually really pleased every time I see the numbers. I'm glad people are participating in it and taking advantage of it. So I'm glad to hear that, the government took care of us.
They did. And the good news is that hopefully the revenue that comes in from this will allow us to not have to increase anything for next year, because I think people are still going to be, watching their pocketbooks. So,
yes,
it definitely did not hurt us, and it helped us get through. Like I said, it offset a fairly significant catering revenue that we might normally see this time of year.
Julie, I just want to clarify. I know what you meant, but when you said that the food service budget isn't an operating budget item at all, there are a few pieces that are. So I just want to make sure we're totally clear about that, like unemployment and those things that come out of the operating budget. If you just so everybody knows.
Well, up until this point, we have taken, I don't know what'll happen with the COVID stuff, Jan, for unemployment. That may hit the regular budget. And the only other thing that, well, utilities would be,
Right.
we don't have a way of metering utilities.
And one
so-
benefit package, right?
And one benefit
Right.
package, that's correct.
Just so everybody knows, because you're right, the rest of it is not on the operating budget.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks for that. Other questions for Julie and Jan?
This is George.
Go ahead, George.
Julia, just a quick question about the two line items that actually had a negative balance besides the projects, and these are both subs, and they both have a reason of leave of absences. And this would be, let's see, the fourth one and the sixth one.
Long-term subs.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that.
So that's not really offset, George, by the positive line item. Is when we have someone who's ill on staff and we bring in a long-term sub, we charge it to that account so we can keep track of it. But typically, if it's a long-term illness, it's offset by the very first line item there, which is or the second line item, depending if it's a para or a teacher. So in other words, they get so much paid sick leave, but then they may go off on non-paid leave or a maternity leave. Sometimes they take a leave of absence. It just depends on the nature of the leave. So we have gone over budget for leaves of absences that were anticipated, so to speak.
You say they were anticipated, they were anticipated? They were not anticipated.
They were not anticipated.
All right, thank you.
All right, I think Karen had a question.
Yeah, just a quick one. I was just wondering if there's any update on retirements, any additional retirements coming through?
We have not heard of any additional beyond what we were aware of.
Yeah, so what number are we at?
For retirements, just one retirement.
Oh,
yep.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been engaged in conversation, with my colleagues across the state, and there's this sense of foreboding that July and August might bring more, because I think as people recognize that they may be looking at a school year that begins in a similar way to the way it ended, we may find people saying it's just a bridge too far. So obviously that's a concern, because then we're all scrambling. So at this point, though, no one has said anything additional.
Yeah, I was just wondering with some of the veteran teachers, this transition to virtual learning, as you say, they'll manage it through this school year, but with the with the unknown situation coming up, they may just difficult.
They
So,
may, and then
right.
we have to worry about people who might be either medically fragile, or they might be in a demographic that for whom there's more risk, and we recognize that those are going to continue to be unknowns. And even if they stay on, what accommodations do we need to make for folks?
Okay.
When can you share the retirement?
When can I share it?
Yeah.
I think it's public information. I'd be happy to share it with you at the next meeting or in a note.
Okay.
This is George, and it's completely off the subject on the budget now. But since it was brought up, do we need to replace this teacher who is trying to retire?
We're all set. We're able to fill that position internally.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions for Jan and Julie on the budget update? All right, thank you both. All right, let's move on to board committee reports, and we'll start with you, George. Anything new on budget and fiscal?
I don't believe so. No, I think there was a note at the bottom of the agenda for agenda note that there is a Board of Ed presentation of Board of Finance coming up June 2nd at 7. But beyond that, I don't have anything else.
Great, thank you, George. And you're right, that is when the meeting is. All right, Eileen, anything new from CABE?
CABE has been very, very active, actually, in incorporating meetings on Fridays at 2 p.m. for board members, board chairs, meeting with the commissioner, any opportunity on the state level. CABE is very involved now, actually, in what they call these regional groups. So they have representation for board members. That was pushed, and the governor heard that. They're actually opening up opportunities for school boards that are not members. That's smart. So that way they get to realize that for boards of education members that are looking how schools are opening or not opening, or some of the pitfalls, you're really getting a chance to go on to Zoom and listen and incorporate, and that's very important.
Yeah, I agree. I think they've done a great job. Thanks, Eileen.
Welcome.
Alan, anything new from facilities?
So this is Alan Hyla. Facilities met last on May 12th, and Julie shared a list of capital improvements in each of the school improvements, and I think it was shared at our last board meeting. So there's no new information other than I just have a question regarding the lighting committee. I understand there's a reprieve at this point. It's not on top on the list, but the lighting at the high school field, has anything new come about since our last meeting, Jan or Julie?
I can't remember if Mrs. Pendleton went to the meeting. Well, why don't you tell them, Julia? And maybe that was after the last facilities meeting.
So I attended one meeting with the town engineer, the first selectman, the zoning officer, and the public works director. And really that was just to begin to kind of get the lay of the land as to what is there, should lights be something that goes forward. And my understanding was that meeting was really for planning purposes for an application that would have to go through zoning, down the road. So there's lots of work, I think, ahead on that. And this was really for the engineer to kind of wrap his head around, what that entails.
Thanks, Julie. That's all I have.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Julie. Jan, anything new from Learn?
They did appoint a new principal for the Marine Magnet High School. It's an internal appointment, and they seem very happy about it. And of course, they're going through beginning to look at what would have to happen for them to reopen, as all superintendents are, and it's just a massive job for all.
Yeah, great. Oh, thank you, Jan. Karen, strategic planning?
Jan just gave us that update on strategic planning.
Okay.
They're all set.
Good. Demographics is me. We haven't had a meeting since, golly, doesn't it seem forever?
Another lifetime.
It was another lifetime when we got to be in person and eat snacks in the same room. So, this is something that I think that I definitely will need to set up like a follow-up meeting, whether that's before the end of this year or, before we get started next year. But I do think like our conversation is going to change a lot about what demographics looks like going forward. So I look forward to those discussions. Karen, personnel?
Yeah, personnel, we're going to actually talk about in executive session.
Exactly. Thank you. And anything from policy, Eileen?
So far, so good.
Great, thank you. And I don't really have anything new to report from the chairman's position, so I think we can move on. So at this time, I would like to thank Jean-Paul and Ian and Amity for guest starring on our board meeting this evening and for joining us. And I'm going to look for a motion to enter into executive session, inviting in Superintendent Giampuccio and Julie Pendleton.
So moved. I'll make a motion.
Second.
Karen, and second by Eileen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. And we'll give Trent a second to get started,
Thank you.
to exit or
And we're live.
All right, so we're coming out of executive session at 9:02. And the first motion I'm going to look for from the board is a motion to approve our transportation contracts amendments with M&J Transportation and Curtin Livery, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, as amended and as presented. Do I have a motion for that?
So moved, Jan Berman.
Second that,
Jan
Tara.
And second by Alan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. And then the second motion that I'd look for from the board is an approval for the superintendent's evaluation summary as presented.
So moved, Eileen Baker.
Moved by Eileen. Do we have a second?
And second it, Cindy.
Seconded by Cindy. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so moved. Just a reminder that we are invited to the Board of Finance meeting on June 2nd at 7 p.m. We have our next Board of Education meeting on June 9th at 7 p.m. And we're going to be looking to have a special meeting on June 11th to interview candidates for our strategic plan process. And with that, I'd like a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Jan Furman.
Moved by Jan. We have a second.
Second,
Second by Eileen. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Sarah, we'll get an invitation to the Board of Finance.
Coming to, I mean, there's a lot of meetings coming up, and since we're all going to be online, if Trent can provide a summary again, that'd be great. He does a really nice job doing that.
Of end of the year meetings?
Of the meetings coming up.
Starting from next week, June 2nd, right? And then if the strategic plan interviews start happening by June 11th, you know, those on the as well and so on. That'd be great.
Of course.
And we'll